Okay, Dan, we're live.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're gonna give folks a little bit of time to log on here. They see the numbers are still going up slowly, but I'm gonna get started because we don't have a lot of time today and we've got a lot to unpack. So first of all, I wanna welcome everyone tonight to this informal session with Congressman Steve Israel. My name is Dan Mansoor. I'm a member of the Cornell class of 1979, and I'm honored to be your host and moderator. This evening is sponsored by the Larry and Judy Tannenbaum Distinguished Speakers Program at Sigma Phi at Cornell. Sigma Phi has been part of the Cornell community since 1890, and since the 1960s, the members of the House have hosted various speakers who come to campus for a public lecture and then some private time at the House to discuss the issues of the day. And we're thrilled that Congressman Israel is joining in this long legacy of distinguished guests. I want to thank the alumni in general for the support of the House, and a special recognition to Larry and Judy Tannenbaum for their continued support of this program. Let me share just a brief bio on Congressman Israel. He left the Capitol Hill, as he likes to state, unindicted and undefeated, to pursue a career as a writer. He served as in the US Congress for 16 years, starting in 2001 through 2017, having served as House Democrats' chief political strategist between 2011 and 2015 as chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Among his many accomplishments while serving, he was one of only 9 members of the House Democratic leadership, and has a singular behind-the-scenes understanding of how Washington officials think, or as he likes to say on occasion, don't think. And I knew he was going to nod on that. As chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, he was the chief architect of the House campaign strategies. Let me talk a little bit about his other passion, which is writing. His most recent book, Big Guns, Skewers, I guess is the word that's listed here, The Gun Lobby. Book list called it Israel's second brilliant political satire, and best-selling author Christopher Buckley called it hilarious, ingenious, and pleasingly wicked. I did have the pleasure of reading his first novel this summer, A Global War on Morris, and I think, as Chris Matthews says, it is a laugh out loud novel. I encourage you to, now that he's unemployed, to definitely buy many copies of the book in hardcover. I'm pleased to note that the Congressman is currently the director of the Nonpartisan Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University. I hope you'll tell us a little bit more about that, since we have a lot of alumni on the lines tonight. The only academically based institute of politics in New York City metropolitan area. And its mission is to curate programs that deepen discourse and raise understanding of political issues and geopolitics. So you can see why he's perfect for the topics of tonight at this time and with this audience. So thank you again for joining us. I just want to let you know that we want this to be informal this evening. We can talk about whatever it is that the audience is interested in, as well as, of course, anything that's on Congressman Israel's mind as we reach 3 weeks and ticking. I do want to say that just from a logistical standpoint, the unofficial Commission on Canceled Debates has laid the ground rules for tonight's discussion. There are no rules. The only thing we can say is topics are on anything the audience is interested in talking about. The only thing we do ask is we are civil and try not to interrupt each other. So with that, let me again just welcome everybody. And let me start with something that crosses my mind. I think, Congressman, you and I both have daughters who I believe will be voting in their first presidential election. It struck me, as it does every year when I think about the students on campus, that today's college students, the 18-year-olds born in 2001 and 2002, for them, Barack Obama is the first president that they might remember. And Donald Trump is the first white president that they've ever known. The fact remains that our youngest voters do not have much to compare with this election season. Are you giving any advice to your daughter, who I believe is voting in her first election? And what would you say to first-time voters for the students among our audience tonight about their role in government and in democracy. And welcome again.
Great question. Thank you for having me on. I also want to recognize a participant, Janet Kask, who is a dear friend for many years. And she emailed me today to tell me that she was on, and I told her, well, you made the whole thing worth doing. So Janet, if you're with us, thanks for everything that you do. And I hope your son will be at Cornell before very long. So Dan, I'll tell you, every gray hair on this head is rooted in politics. And as you said, I was the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee for 4 years and ran 8 campaigns for Congress, winning campaigns, and had my share of elections. I've never seen an election like this. I've never seen a political environment like this. This is uncharted territory. And there's so much to be anxious about. However, on the topic of young voters, one of the few areas of extraordinary hope that I have and optimism is with young people. I teach a course at Cornell on politics, film, and culture. And now we're doing it remotely. And what we do is we trace the impact of film on politics and politics on film from Jimmy Stewart's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington back in 1939, all the way through Veep and House of Cards and our cartoon president. And when I do this class, Dan, on Thursdays from 8 to 10, and listen to those students, these are undergrads at Cornell, and understand the depth of their passion for change and their vision for an inclusive America, I just feel really inspired. I feel good. I don't feel that good about the Congress that I left in 2017. I certainly don't feel that good about what's happening in Washington now and with President Trump. We'll keep this respectful, but you get what I'm saying. But I feel that those young voters are our great hope. And my generation may have screwed it up, but they're going to correct this. I'll tell you one quick story about one of my daughters. It's tough to be the child or children of a member of Congress. It's really hard. First of all, I was on a plane for 16 years. I was on a plane virtually every single Monday night or Tuesday morning to get to Washington. I didn't come home until Thursday or Friday. And then I had to work all weekend, touching various points of my district. My younger daughter became really involved in politics, but she was and still is as far to the left as possible. So in 2008, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, of course, I was deeply involved as a member of Congress and somebody who knew her. And she came out to Suffolk County, Long Island to do a conversation. And I brought my younger daughter, her name is Alana, into the green room. And we were talking to Hillary, and Hillary looked at her and she said, "Oh, Alana, thank you for supporting my campaign for president." My daughter just looked at her and said, "I'm supporting Dennis Kucinich, and I've raised $25 for him." And my daughter was a vegan at the age of 9 and an anarchist. I mean, she was Antifa before Antifa. So Hillary, God bless her, she just loved it. She loves an empowered woman. She just cackled. And this actually answers your question. That generation, their convictions are so set, and they want a fair and just world, and they don't care about, the protocols or the orthodoxies. They're just going to fix this country. So I do feel good about those first-time voters.
Historically, that's the youngest of generation that stays away from the polls. Is that changing? Is that going to change?
Yeah, this election turnout's not going to be a problem in this election. In fact, if you heard the news, long lines in Texas today, just a massive turnout for in-person voting. And we all have heard the stories about this massive influx of absentee ballots and write-in ballots that the U.S. Postal Service needs to handle. Youth turnout in past elections has been problematic. It's hard to get young people out in a presidential election, not even talking about midterm elections. But I think that young voters have been so energized in this campaign that I don't have to tell them that this is the most important election of their lives, even though it is the first election of their lives.
Right.
They know it. And not only are they voting, they're registering other young people to vote. I don't know whether that's unique at Cornell. I hope it is, but I also hope that every university is doing it. But they are committed and they're voting.
No, I think that it is nationwide. I think there's several organizations. I think there's an organization, I don't remember the name exactly, that sort of set up a competition among the universities to see how many of the students and percentage of the population they could get to vote. I think you're right. I think that I think the young people, and having two young daughters who vocalized their thoughts, they do blame us. They said, how is it possible? But I think the second reaction is there something I can do about it, and what is that going to be? So,
right.
Well, the next question always crosses my mind. When I've seen studies of faculty at universities and where their political donations go, and political attitudes on college campuses, it skews dramatically to the left. Talk a little bit about education, and is it cause and effect? Is it chicken and egg? Where are the liberal attitudes on college campuses coming from?
You've not visited Liberty University recently, have you? Or Brigham Young University lately?
No. I got to be careful what I say here. I thought about it, but then they finally locked it down. So
yeah. Look, I think it's fair to say that there is a disproportionate share of progressives among university students and faculty, depending on the demography of, depending on the location of the university. Universities I was just reading a story in the New York Times yesterday, kind of heartbreaking story about this small town of like 5,000 people that never had a partisan election for mayor. And an African-American woman decided that she was going to run. And these are nonpartisan elections. You campaign based on stop signs and potholes. Your position on LGBTQ issues really doesn't enter into it. There is no ideology. And according to this story, it just became like a Trump versus Biden proxy war. Now, there happens to be a university located in this town, and many members of the town council actually are faculty at this university. So the university is the liberal bastion in an otherwise ruby red town. So there's an example of kind of a blue oasis in a very red Republican area. I would also say, so that's an example. I think the reason for the disproportionate level of progressivism in universities has to do with the fact that, and I don't want to generalize, but if you look at the data, specifically with respect to this election, college-educated voters are voting for Joe Biden in massive numbers. Non-college educated voters are more supportive of Donald Trump. Now, why is that? I think the reason is that the more exposure you have to an education, the more your mind is challenged, the more you are compelled to pursue inquiry, the more tolerant you are, and the broader your understanding of things may be. And that is borne out by the data in this campaign and many other campaigns. College-educated voters tend to skew Democratic, non-college educated voters tend to skew Republican, and that plays out on college campuses.
Okay. I just want to take a moment now for folks that are joining us. You can go to the chat room or the chat link at the bottom of your screen and share your questions, which I'll moderate for the congressman. So. When we were setting this up, you asked us to make sure we didn't pick a date where there might be a debate, so we didn't pick this Thursday. What are you doing this Thursday? Some thoughts about the debate, or I should say debates, plural. I'd love to hear both the presidential, specifically, obviously this fall, but do debates have a purpose today? I mean, where people aren't listening and we're all just shouting over each other.
It's a very good question. So I do not believe that debates are particularly impactful, particularly at the presidential level. Debates, it's like the Super Bowl, right? That's what a debate is, a presidential debate is. You have two teams, and there are very few undecided fans in the stadium. So the debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden, 90%, Dan, 90% of the electorate has made up its mind. They are unmalleable. They are either completely committed to vote for Donald Trump or completely committed to vote for Joe Biden, and nothing that happened at the debate is going to change their minds. That's the real unique aspect of this election. People think it's a national election. It's not a national election, Dan. It's an election in about 12 critical states, maybe 30 important media markets, trying to win the votes of the 10% of the electorate that has not yet made a judgment. And the debate for those, by the way, for that 10%, if you were in that 10% and you watched the first debate, then according to the data, you broke 2-1 for Joe Biden just based on the president's performance. With the president, I'm friendly with quite a few people in the president's orbit. And in fact, his first chief of staff, Reince Priebus, appeared at an Institute of Politics and Global Affairs function that we did to talk about what was happening inside the White House. But they tell me, they understand that the president's path to re-election is by expanding his vote share. He is solid with 40% of the electorate. But you cannot win the presidency, particularly if you don't have a third candidate in the race with 40% of the electorate. He's got to grow to and expand among moderate voters, suburban women, and young people. And his debate performance on the first night, all he did is compelled them to support Joe Biden. So that debate didn't, it was not consequential. One other thing I should mention, we took a look at this at our institute on the question of, do debates change the trajectory of a race? And most of the time, if you look at public opinion polling 2 weeks before the debate, and then look at it again 2 weeks after the debate, it's similar. Mm-hmm. So you may dip as a result, like Trump dipped as a result of the first debate, but there's a certain gravity. People will go back to you. Maybe you do better on the second performance. The only exception was in 1976, Jimmy Carter running against Gerald Ford. He was at 57% support 2 weeks before the debate. After the debate, he went down to 53%. Oh, but by the way, he won the election. So mm-hmm. I do not believe that debates do anything other than help your fundraising, help you with your own base, and change a few undecided minds. In this environment, there's only about 10% of the electorate that remains undecided.
Well, let me, the natural tangent for me is we've lost our willingness to debate. You and I remember point counterpoint. We remember television shows moderated where you had people on both sides who were, I'd like to think, listening to each other, but making their case and then giving the chance for the audience and drawing audience from both sides of the aisle or from various opinions. Can you talk a little bit about, can we come back? Can we take a step back from our biases and our inability to hear the other side's rationale and reasoning? And if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the House Center Aisle Caucus and how that came about.
Sure. Well, let me break that down. They're actually related. Let me talk about the House Center Aisle Caucus as it relates to the inability of Congress to truly debate important issues. As a result of gerrymandering, as a result of social media, as a result of people who curate their own news based on algorithms, as a result of conservative broadcast radio, as a result of residential self-sorting, people now live in either a congressional district that either has a Cracker Barrel or a Whole Foods. So our communities are red and blue. As a result of all that, the people's representatives in Congress are just as polarized, right? And so I was always frustrated by the lack of civil and courteous debate on Capitol Hill. And when I say lack, I don't mean just quality, I mean quantity. So if you're debating, this massive issue, let's say the war in Iraq, should we commit US troops to Iraq? You know that by the rules, if you're lucky as a member of Congress, you'll get 1 minute on the floor of the House to express yourself on that issue. 1 minute. The rules are set up so that usually, the Republicans control 20 minutes, the Democrats control 20 minutes. Now, sometimes the leadership will say, look, we need 4 hours to accommodate it. But how can you explain the complexities of the world, the volatility, the uncertainty, the ambiguity of the world in 1 minute? So as a result, we have a Congress of sound bites. If you only have 1 minute, guess what? You're going to rattle off a soundbite that is going to be repeated back home. Maybe it'll be quoted in a newspaper, or maybe you get some television time. That helps explain why Congress seems as dysfunctional and as hostile as it is. So I decided, with a congressman named Tim Johnson from Illinois, a Republican, to do something about it. And we created the House Center Aisle Caucus. I chose 24 Democrats, he chose 24 Republicans. We met on Monday nights at the Hunan Dynasty Chinese restaurant on Pennsylvania Avenue, 3 blocks from the Capitol. And we would all sit around a table and we'd pick an issue, let's say Obamacare. And we'd have a kitchen timer and we'd set it for 5 minutes, state your disagreements. 55 minutes, what can we agree on? And Dan, it was the most liberating and refreshing experience that I had in 16 years in Congress. Because when you're talking to people over dinner, you get to understand where they're coming from. You get to see their worldview. They get to see yours. We need more of that in Congress. So many people criticize these junkets, when these congressmen go on these expensive trips. Let me tell you, brother, my junkets were usually to Iraq or Afghanistan, right, on a military airplane. Not the cushiest thing in the world. But when I went on those trips with a Republican, there was a Republican from Georgia named Phil Gingrey. I despised the guy, despised him. Why? Because the only time I saw him or talked to him was when he was breathing fire at me on Fox News. Yeah. Right? Or doing a 1 minute statement about how Democrats were socialists. When you're on a plane for 14 hours sitting next to Phil Gingrey, we came back as best friends. And so we need more of those interactions. That's how you get back to things. And once people see their Congress engaged in civil discourse and finding common ground, they'll understand that they've got to do the same thing.
Were you able to take, besides leftovers, back to the chambers? I mean, no. How did this impact?
Let me tell you, I got stuck with the bill. I'm still trying to figure out why I had to pay for compromise on Capitol Hill. And by the way, it was like $60 for 50 people. So not the worst thing in the world.
But did this help when you got back to chambers,
Yes. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. To this day, I speak to my former colleagues almost every single day, Republicans and Democrats. And to this day, I'm able to converse with folks, and just based on the fact that we know each other and they understand my issues and I understand theirs. Politics is nothing but relations, Dan. It's nothing but relationships. That's what it is. And if you can build those relationships, even when you disagree, you can figure out ways to get around those disagreements.
Well, we have a great example of that, of course, with the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our Cornell alumna.
Yes.
And Anthony Scalia. I mean, I think to this day, people who hear the story almost don't believe it. But, and I didn't realize that they start each day by the 9 justices all shaking hands and greeting each other, which might take a little bit longer in Congress, but it's not a bad way to start. We got a few questions from the audience, so let me just go right to that. How concerned Nicholas writes to us, how concerned are you that the election is going to be declared rigged and the Supreme Court will have to step in?
Nicholas, I'm very concerned. We had, through the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University, another shameless plug, we've been really delving into that in our webinars. And by the way, for anybody, you are our customers. Alumni are our clients, and it's free. So if you visit our website, you can register for all of our programming. We just had Jeffrey Toobin on, who wrote a brilliant piece for the New Yorker on what we can expect in terms of litigation in the aftermath of the election. We have had a variety of people on both sides of the aisle who are thinking about what the aftermath may be and what's the trajectory to the Supreme Court. I am so deeply concerned about the aftermath of this election. And I have to say, this is going to sound surprising and shocking and maybe make some people angry, but I don't think that Donald Trump has derailed democracy. I don't think he's derailed democracy. I don't think he's undermined democracy. Democracy has been fragile since roughly 2000. It reached its nadir in about 2015, 2016. Donald Trump exploited the loss of faith in democracy. He didn't cause the loss of faith in democracy. He was a symptom. And at the Institute, we're launching something called the Campaign for Democracy that's going to really do a deep dive into what makes 30% of our population predisposed to an authoritarian government. Why is it that a recent poll showed that nearly 50% of Americans of those polled said, if my candidate doesn't win the presidency, then violence may be an option. What's happened to this country? Why do people have those sentiments? We're going to do the deep dive. We're going to do focus groups. We're going to go into battleground communities. We're going to do an assessment of what's motivating this lack of faith in democracy. And then we're going to work to build people's resilience so that when we have foreign intrusion or white supremacists or militias who are really working to dismantle democracy, people will say, stop. No, not acceptable. That's going to be a key activity of our institute. And I think you're going to see great evidence of how unstable it will be after the election. No matter who wins, half of the electorate is going to believe that it was rigged, no matter who wins. And I think you're going to see civil unrest and you're going to see endless litigation. And the whole world is going to look at us and say, that's not a functioning democracy. And so we have to be prepared and address it and rebuild people's faith in democratic norms by rebuilding those democratic norms. Sorry for being so long-winded, but you can tell we are really taking a granular look at this at my institute.
Now, one of the questions I was reading this morning, which is always a dangerous thing to do, but the question is, why aren't reasonable men and women on both sides of the aisle echoing their common desire for a peaceful transfer, if there is one, confidence in our electorate? And why haven't we heard from former politicians, whether it's our presidents, to some degree we have, but that seems like those who've stepped down from their positions are on both sides of the aisle would be the best people to communicate and for us to look to, because we all somebody voted for either of those candidates in the past.
So you'll be happy to know, I'm not sure who asked the question, but you'll be very happy to know that when we launch this campaign for democracy at Cornell, it's going to consist of just those people, Republicans and Democrats, former senators, former governors, former members of Congress, former ambassadors, who will step up and speak out on behalf of respecting democratic norms. And we're not exclusive. There are other groups who are doing it. But we are the only university-based group that's doing it. So that will happen. If I may, let me take you deep inside the Capitol to answer a kind of a related question, which is, why don't sitting members of Congress step up and condemn efforts to suggest that this election will have been rigged?
Well, I'd say your center aisle caucus would be 50 that come to mind, but.
Well, they wouldn't have, and here's why. So I asked that question. I'm not going to name names, forgive me, but I spent time with a group of sitting Republicans who were involved in the center aisle caucus. And And now I visit with them when I'm down in Washington. I haven't been down in Washington since for quite some time. But I stopped in and talked to a group of them, and a particular friend of mine assembled several Republican colleagues. And I said, why don't you guys, I know that you're institutional conservatives. Why won't you criticize what's going on? And here's what I was told. Those of us who have criticized the president have either been lost in primaries or been vilified in tweets. And our districts love this president. So why would we criticize this president? Now you can make the argument, well, what about principle, right? But in politics, survival trumps principle very often, not all the time. And quite honestly, if you are a conservative Republican representing a district where 80% of your electorate is conservative Republican and they love Donald Trump, you're just representing their view. Yeah. There is a theory that if President Trump loses, that he will be the face of the resistance, that he may step down, that maybe we're too anxious about his refusal to leave, that he may leave, he may buy a television network, he may be the face of the resistance for another 4 years. He may not be the president, but he will be the resistor in chief. And those Republicans in Congress will still be intimidated by him because a tweet can go viral or he can engineer a primary. So I don't see this fidelity to the president, this partisan fidelity to the president disappearing anytime soon.
How would term limits change things?
I'm a huge opponent of term limits. We have term limits. Every member of Congress, every member of the House of Representatives has a 2-year term limit. And if you're doing a decent job and you're reflecting the values of your district, you get rehired. Term limits actually have proved in Congress. I'll tell you why I think they're so dangerous. You've got the House, you've got the Senate, you've got the executive branch, you've got the Supreme Court, and then you have the lobbying community. And I was once talking to a friend of mine who was a lobbyist, and he said, we had good friendship, so we would take kind of good-natured shots at one another. You know what he said to me? He said, you're going to leave here at some point. If you're a member of Congress, it's not lifetime, but lobbying is. In other words, we'll be here. Now, if you say to every member of Congress, you only get 6 years and then you're gone, that completely empowers the lobbying community to achieve what they want. And so I prefer to have the people's representatives make those decisions. I term limited myself. Of course, it was 8 terms. But at a certain point, I made the decision, it's time to replenish. It's time to pass the torch. Let somebody else do this with fresh ideas. But I don't think it should be imposed on elected officials.
Okay. Another question. In a nutshell, I always like questions that start in a nutshell. What is the constitutional argument against the Affordable Care Act? And what are the chances it'll be overturned by the court?
Well, here you got me on the constitutional stuff, because much to my mother's eternal shame, I never went to law school. And so now that I'm out of Congress, I don't have to pretend to know what I don't know. So I won't delve into the constitutional arguments. There's far smarter and folks with much more extensive and granular understanding of this. In terms of whether the Supreme Court will overturn it, this depends entirely, and this we got from Jeff Toobin in his conversation, this depends entirely on whether it becomes a Trump court or remains a Roberts court. Assuming that Justice Barrett is confirmed, it's very possible that the center of power that now resides with Chief Justice Roberts will in fact migrate to a Trump court, in which case I believe that the Affordable Care Act is, that there's a good probability that the Affordable Care Act and Roe v. Wade will be dismantled. If the court remains a Roberts court and he has his ways of influencing his colleagues, then I believe that Affordable Care Act and Roe v. Wade are safer. So it's just about where the pendulum ends up in that building across the street from the United States Congress.
Greg Chung, who took your class last fall in
Yeah.
politics, is posing a question.
Now there's a guy, Greg, I hope I gave you an A. Any guy who comes back for a repeat performance definitely deserves an A.
Well, his question is actually about your grading policy. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what he's got here.
By the way, if you can't get an A in politics and film and culture, we got to have a talk.
At least the film part. He's asking the following. In one of our quote, parenthetically, early Thursday morning classes, we were discussing the upcoming presidential election, and you mentioned a handful or two of counties in the various battleground states that would be pivotal to determine the outcome of the overall election. One of them being Kenosha County, Wisconsin. Lots happened in Kenosha since you shared those thoughts.
Greg, that is just, I'm so proud of you for remembering my formula. Everything you need to know about who's going to win the presidential election is basically revealed by three numbers and three numbers only. And those numbers are 12, 10, and 30. 12 is the 12 battleground states that are at play. Now, by the way, 7 of those states are true battlegrounds, true toss-ups. And then 3 of those states, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Nevada, are states that Joe Biden must win because Hillary won them, and he can't afford to lose a state. And the other 3, Arizona, Texas, and Georgia, are Trump must-wins because he can't afford to lose states that he won. And that aggregates to 12 states. So that's the first number, 12. The next number is 10, and I already talked about that. That's the 10% of the population that's not yet made a judgment. Everybody else either loves or loathes. So that's just 10%. And the final number is 30, and this is what Greg is talking about. That's the number of media markets that will determine the next president. So he talks about Kenosha. Kenosha County in Wisconsin, it's kind of a suburb exurb of Milwaukee. Perhaps there are people on this who live there. Kenosha voted for Obama Biden twice, and then Trump won it by less than a percentage point in 2016. And that's how he carried Wisconsin, which is how he won the Electoral College. Whoever wins Kenosha wins Wisconsin. In my view, whoever wins Wisconsin wins the Electoral College. Obviously, Kenosha was the site of a crisis where some folks took to the streets and violence was perpetrated and property damage was inflicted. And so Kenosha is going to be one of those very important influences. And I haven't seen any polls in Kenosha recently. I have seen polling in Wisconsin that shows that Joe Biden actually has quite a comfortable lead. So Kenosha, Wisconsin. If you live in Florida, Pinellas County, suburbs of St. Petersburg. If you live in Pennsylvania, Erie, Luzerne, Lackawanna in Western Pennsylvania. If you live in Arizona, it's all about Maricopa County. For anybody who is interested in having a detailed map, I can provide it to you. If you just email us at the Institute, I can provide you with a report that details and breaks down all of these numbers.
Great. Thanks. And thanks, Greg, for logging on. Greg is a proud member of our fraternity. I'm allowed to say that since we're sponsoring. So Matt writes, what do you see as the greatest threat to the security of the United States beyond its own borders?
Beyond our borders? Well, I would say there are several, but I think the greatest threat right now is the attempts by foreign governments to sow discord within the United States, to pull us apart, to divide us by penetrating social media and by using very sophisticated cyber tactics to continue to divide this country. There's so much of that is happening. And it's principally coming from Russia. Now China is also becoming involved. So look, Lincoln was right. United we stand, divided we fall. And we're divided right now. And it's coming from foreign intrusion and many other socioeconomic factors. But our adversaries abroad are actively attempting to continue to divide us. and erode our faith in ourselves and our institutions. In terms of geopolitical concerns, I was on the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee and the Armed Services Committee. And I'll tell you, I am deeply concerned about the long-term effects of climate disruption on our national security. You talk to any military planner, and they will tell you that conflict arises from instability. Instability arises from a variety of circumstances, including lack of resources, people who are thirsty, people who are hungry, illiteracy, people who aren't educated, and the lack of the empowerment of women. On the resource side, right, food, water, energy. As this crisis develops, from all of the analyses that I have seen, it's going to put more pressure on people, and that translates to a more hospitable breeding ground for the recruiting of terrorists. I read one report that predicted that within 20 or 30 years, ideological terrorism would significantly reduce, but it would be replaced by resource terrorism. People willing to engage in acts of terror in order to get water, food, and energy. And so I really worry about that. And then finally, I have to say, North Korea concerns me, and a policy in North Korea that I thought was very foolish, short-sighted, and naive. Well, we'll leave it there because we have limited time, but I could talk about many other things.
We'll come back.
Okay.
When you came to Congress in 2001, I sort of want to put a timeline on this. 2004, Mark Zuckerberg was in his dorm room at Harvard thinking up Facebook. In 2007, the iPhone was introduced. And in 2008, there were 100 million people using Facebook.
Yeah.
And you may have answered this in the previous question, but how have those creations changed politics? And I just add one thought that, I remember the expression, all politics is local, but there's no more local media, or it's not as strong as it used to be. People aren't reading local papers or going out. So with this technology, with social media, how has this changed politics in this country?
Well, I'll just build on what I said before, and I'm glad you asked, because it is a complex issue that deserves some time. I think, I'm sorry to say, I think that it has changed politics for the worst, and I'll give you several examples. First of all, most people do not get their news anymore from traditional news sources. When I grew up, I was a little kid in Levittown, New York, on Long Island, America's first suburb. I remember my parents would turn on Walter Cronkite. We watched the moon landing, and Walter Cronkite told us what was going on. And in those days, the federal government and the aftermath had something called the Fairness Doctrine. So if you were a television network and you presented one view of things, you were required, because you were a steward of the airwaves, to present an opposing view. And that helps explain why we were so much more cohesive in those days, because most people heard and processed two sides of an argument. Now, there is no fairness doctrine, there's no equal time doctrine. And on social media, you got to figure out how to get your message out in like 143 characters on Twitter, or in some really spiffy Facebook ad. You cannot communicate effectively, folks. You cannot probe the depths of complex issues in a tweet. President Trump believes you can, but it cannot be done. The reason there's no discourse in this country, or very little discourse in the country, is we've all developed kind of a national attention deficit disorder. We get our stuff from social media. We have these television clickers, right? We don't like what we're hearing, click to the next thing. And I think we need a new paradigm in this country that returns us to discourse and respect by reinstating the Fairness Doctrine and the Equal Time Doctrine. There was a piece by Charlie Wurtzel in the New York Times yesterday. I talked to him about this, where he's very tough on Facebook and very tough on Zuckerberg. I've met Zuckerberg a couple times, and believes, Wurzel's view is Facebook has to be broken up because it has too much influence and its influence is being exploited by bad actors. I wouldn't go that far, but the fact that there's a column in the New York Times that proposes that answers the question on just how impactful social media has been on our politics.
Jeff writes, Lyndon Johnson was quoted as saying, "If I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost the country." And this was on the subject of Vietnam. And
that's exactly right.
You know, and I was watching next to my dad the same evening news. My dad actually complained that when Dan Rather took over, he couldn't sleep through the news anymore. But that's a whole nother issue. But I guess the question that well, let me just address, somebody asked us, has Trump permanently damaged our relationships with our allies? Specifically, they're addressing the Kurds, and trust in the promises the United States makes more broadly.
Permanently, no, I don't believe so. But he has certainly set them back. And if, my view, if the president is reelected, then those alliances may be irreparably damaged. We can still repair them, but we need an administration that understands engaging with our allies, supporting our allies, taking, strong, muscular, smart approaches towards our adversaries, rebuilding collective alliances. That's what we're going to need in order to repair the damage that has been done. And frankly, I sense and have read about many leaders around the world saying, look, let's just wait this out. It'll be okay. Let's just wait this out. You can't have a foreign policy where foreign leaders are banking on the next election, to make critical strategic decisions.
You came to Congress in 2001. My first question is, were you really in fourth grade watching Walter Cronkite and said, I want to go to Congress? I mean, how did this come about?
So, yeah, well, I was in fourth grade. I remember this so vividly. I was sitting at my desk at Gardner's Avenue Elementary School in Levittown. It was June, and we used to have these public address speakers in all the classrooms, and I heard the crackle of the PA system, and the principal of my school got on and announced that Robert Kennedy had died from gun wounds the night before. He'd been in surgery. And I just remember sitting at that desk in fourth grade thinking, why would somebody hurt another person just because of their ideas? And I went home that day and turned on the news, and I was watching CBS News, and I became a news junkie in fourth grade and became consumed with it. And I had three dreams growing up in Levittown. One was to one day be a congressman. The second was to one day write a novel. And the third was to play left field for the New York Mets. Since I sucked at baseball, I just had to focus on dream one and dream two. And I'm very fortunate because both of those dreams, they proved out. So I'm a very fortunate individual.
So you came to Congress in 2001, January. Your district was Long Island.
Yeah.
Talk about 9/11.
So I get elected in November. I'm sworn in. I raise my right hand on the floor of the House of Representatives and take my oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By the way, if Janet Kask is on this, she lived through the horror of 9/11 in a very significant way. Her son Aiden was born on 9/11. She was trapped in a tunnel in Manhattan trying to get out, go to the hospital. Anyway, I'm suddenly a congressman. Until that time, my most important meeting, Dan, was meeting with the highway superintendent of the town of Huntington to talk about paving issues. And now I'm a congressman. And on 9/11, suddenly I am thrust in with all of my colleagues into a surreal environment where I'm sitting with the President of the United States, George W. Bush, and the Vice President, and the Secretary of State, and the CIA Director, and the Secretary of Defense, and sitting in on decision-making that I knew would alter the trajectory of the world. And who am I? I'm a former town councilman from Huntington. 200 of my constituents were killed on 9/11. I had been to more funerals and memorial services than I ever thought was possible. And so 9/11 affected us all in different ways. For people who lost somebody, there's no effect more profound than what they went through. But it also, I think, helped me mature very quickly as a member of Congress and to understand the importance of grasping geostrategic issues. It's why I joined the Armed Services Committee. I was on the Financial Services Committee. I got right on the Armed Services Committee after that because I wanted to understand how we defend ourselves and what are the components of a strong defense. So it changed all of us and I think made me a more thoughtful member of Congress with respect to national security, foreign policy, and intelligence issues. But who cares how it shaped me? The more important thing is what impact it had on Americans around the country and those who suffered loss that day.
Well, I think some people in the press often refer to that period as the time when Americans all came together. I mean, nobody asked, what political views you had, where you lived in the country, yours.
I remember that night. It was just mayhem in Washington, just mayhem. We had never seen anything like it. And that evening, we all went back to the Capitol. We stood on the steps. Many people viewing this will remember that night. And we spontaneously held hands and sang "God Bless America." That was not planned. What was planned was to show the world that the Congress hadn't been disrupted and that we were going to do the people's business. It was, and the leaders of both parties gave speeches. But all of a sudden, it was like the wave in a baseball stadium. Spontaneously, people started singing "God Bless America," holding hands. And I wondered that night, how long can this last? And it didn't last as long as it should have.
So I want to let our audience know that we've just got a few more minutes. So if they've got any other questions, feel free to ask them now. How well did you know your grandparents and what influence did they have on your life?
The reason I was elected to Congress, my grandparents.
Tell us a little about them. I picked it up from one of the interviews in your office. And
my maternal grandparents fled Russia and Ukraine to come to the United States. And I kept their original immigration certificates hanging on my wall closest to my desk in my office in Washington, D.C. What we put on our walls are the most important values we have. We really think about what we're putting on our walls. And so I decided to put my grandparents' immigration certificates on my walls, and their pictures were on those certificates. And whenever I had a really hard decision, I would stand up and just reflect on those photographs and look at those and look at their faces. And I saw eyes that witnessed persecution, poverty, pogroms. My grandmother's father was, our family narrative tells us, killed in a pogrom. She was smuggled out of her village in Preluki in a hay cart. So I see fear in those eyes, but I also saw these eyes wide open to this new opportunity, this new place, America. And I often thought, when those pictures were taken, my grandparents never would have thought that they would be hanging in the United States Capitol, placed there by a grandson with the title Congressman. But they had to believe that if that was possible anywhere, it was possible in the country that they came to. And so their memory guided me in every difficult decision I ever made as a congressman. I disappointed them at times. I cast the wrong votes at times, but I always sought their counsel, and I still do.
Great story. Thank you for sharing. Let me just ask, I'm going to turn sort of the floor back to you. You've got an audience. What do you want them to know as they approach the next 3 weeks and the coming year? And, what do you tell the students who are on the Horn? They've had a unbelievably dramatic and unusual and stressful 7-8 months, and we're not sure when it's going to end. And I think they would love to hear some
Well,
words of wisdom.
I'll speak to the students first. And of the students, I already told you how proud I am of you, that in my moments of pessimism, I think about what I hear from you. I love doing this class on Thursday mornings, not just because we watch films and talk about politics, but you make me feel better. You give me confidence and hope and optimism because of your passion. But passion alone is not going to influence an election. You got to vote. You got to have a plan to vote. So as committed and as passionate as you are, you got to make sure that you cast a vote and everybody around you casts a vote, no matter who you're voting for. And for the broader audience, I left Congress to write, but also because I wanted to raise the level of discourse on important public policy issues. The Army War College came up with an acronym that perfectly explains the environment we're in. When the military gives something an acronym, you know it's important. And the acronym that they came up with was VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Does that not explain everything? We live in a VUCA world. I left to start this Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell to break through the VUCA, to have people with different opinions and takes and perspectives on issues talk agreeably, to cultivate the next generation of public servants who believe in democratic norms and will fight every day to protect those norms, not undermine those norms. I believe that our institute has raised the discourse and deepened understanding by featuring Nancy Pelosi, and right after she became Speaker, and Reince Priebus, a Republican senator from Louisiana, Bill Cassidy, and Amy Klobuchar. We do these programs several times a week. And I hope that if you don't mind me closing with this plug,
Not at all.
and we exist to service the Cornell community. We raise our own budget, but Cornell has been very generous in subsidizing our operations. So we exist to serve you. And so you can just Google Cornell Institute of Politics, or you can go to iopga.cornell.edu, and please take advantage of what we're offering. Because I think you will feel more satisfied. You will feel more fulfilled. You will see in this clamor around us that there are people talking not at one another, but with one another to find some common ground. That's why we exist, and I hope that you will participate.
Congressman, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. We know you're incredibly busy, especially this time of the year. We look forward to doing this again. Certainly, we hope to do it in person on the Cornell campus as well as in New York City. So, and thank you for our audience for joining us tonight. This session has been recorded. We will provide a link to that for you to both rewatch as well as certainly share it with friends. So everyone be safe, make sure you vote, and thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody.